of your being, but they rub up against other people's rights, so we have to sort that out. We do that with court and precedent. And that's what the Human Rights Commission and Tribunal in Ontario can dispense with if they want. And the reason I know the reason that they put that line in there, it's because the social justice hypothesis is that the legal structures of Western civilization are oppressive, patriarchal, and so it's perfectly reasonable to toss them over if you're in pursuit of something like social justice. It's like, that's fine, people. Sure, go ahead and do that. But if you think that you can transform what we have already now into some kind of utopia, then you're dangerous, because that isn't how the world works. And utopians have been more dangerous than any other people for the last 100 years. That's for sure. Like, there's all sorts of things wrong with Western society. Always, and there always will be. But compared to 85 to 90% of the rest of the planet, this is bloody heaven. And that's why people want to move here. So you can say, well, it's corrupt compared to my imaginary utopia. It's like, yeah, that's for sure. It certainly is. But if your imaginary utopia was realized in hardcore politics over a 30-year period, everyone would be out in the streets starving to death. We already know that because it happened multiple times throughout the 20th century in societies that were, well, they weren't as sophisticated as our society is now, but they were plenty sophisticated for their time. And you'll hear the neo-Marxist types, this is the most annoying argument anyone ever makes. They say, well, what happened in the Soviet Union, that wasn't real communism. It's like, first, oh yes it was. That's why it also happened in China, which was a very different society. But what they really mean when they say that is, well, you know, that Stalin character, he wasn't such a good guy. He didn't really know how to implement the Marxist doctrines. But me, I'm pretty pure of heart. And if you would have made me dictator for 20 years, then the utopia would have arrived as promised. It's like, first of all, if you think that, there's something wrong with you. You're dangerous. And second, let's just say for a minute that some saint did get a hold of the tools of power and try to implement from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, and actually did that in a pure and saint-like manner. Here's what would happen. The next people in the revolutionary string, like Stalin, would come along and stab them in their bed in the middle of the night, and that would be the end of that. So there's absolutely no excuse whatsoever for that sort of thinking. And if you read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Archipelago, which you should do, like everyone should, because it's like the definitive document of this sort of thing that emerged from the 20th century, Solzhenitsyn laid out with extraordinary clarity, first in his writings on Lenin and then in his writings on the Soviet Union more broadly, exactly how the pernicious and pathological Marxist doctrines were transformed logically and systematically into the sorts of laws that killed millions of people. Millions of people. There were people starving so badly in the Soviet Union by the 1920s that they had posters telling them not to eat their children. So we've been down that road already. So what the hell are we doing? We're going down that road again under the guise of equity, right? And equality. Well, that was the doctrines that promoted those laws to begin with. Not good.
Okay, so when Dr. Peterson, when you talk this way, some people are going to say either you're blowing things out of proportion, or you've made a huge leap from where we are now to where we should be. And so I think there's a lot of room for misunderstanding for people, especially if they have certain ideologies that they'd like to protect. So one of the reasons I wanted to invite people over was to be able to ask questions. You've heard some of Dr. Peterson's tenets that he's trying to convey. And he said, and I don't know how many videos each person has watched, but you have an opportunity right now, if that's okay.
Yeah,
if someone has a specific question, either from something that Dr. Peterson has said today, or things you've heard in the videos that's been nagging at you, go like, I really want to ask him face to face, straight up, what do you mean by this, or what is your solution to that? Please, I'm opening up the floor. Just talk really loud, please, so the mic can pick it up and then everyone can hear. Does anybody have a specific question that you would like to ask? Okay.
Oh, sorry, I'll let her.
Okay.
No.
Sure, okay. Barbara Kay?
Okay, it's a little bit of a sidebar, but I've watched several of your videos. They're brilliant, and some of your longer ones in explaining. And I'm intrigued by your. I know that Solzhenitsyn is one of your heroes. I know that Solzhenitsyn was a great man, but I'm a little disturbed, and I would love to know, why was he anti-Semitic?
You know, the book that he wrote in which he was accused of anti-Semitism has not been yet translated into English.
You mean there was only one place where...
Well, one of the things that he did, there's certainly no sign of anti-Semitism in the Gulag Archipelago, not as far as I could tell. And I don't think, in the other books I've read, I haven't seen that either. He did write a book near the end of his life on the role that Jewish intellectuals played in the establishment of the Soviet Union. But you can't get it in English, so I don't know what to say about that. I know that it's been criticized from both sides, I would say. One side saying, well, this was a story that needed to be told, and the other side saying, well, this veers into anti-Semitism. So, but you would ask that question. That's a really hard question, man. Okay, so I'm going to venture out on a limb, because I've been thinking about this for a while. Am I going to venture out on a limb? No, I'm not. I haven't got my thoughts formulated well enough. The leftist doctrines tend to be very attractive to intellectuals. And so any group that's overrepresented in intellectuals is likely going to be overrepresented on the leftist end of the spectrum. And there are temperamental reasons for that. We know that if you lean left, it's because you're higher in openness and lower in orderliness. And that seems to be associated with IQ, at least in part. But I don't want to go into it any more than that because I haven't thought it through sufficiently. But I also haven't been able to get a copy of Solzhenitsyn's last book because you can't get it in English. It hasn't been translated for one reason or another. So, but I don't think you'll see anything like that in the Gulag Archipelago.
Okay, thank you.
There's another question. Before I'm going to have you ask the question, but afterwards I want to get back to this because you mentioned this a number of times about the correlates between IQ and the left, and that the people who believe in or who support thought police are not actually they're not leftists. They're a whole other category. I'd like to get back to that. It's such an important distinction. I'd like to return to in a few minutes.
Okay.
But first, this question, please.
So, if the current proposition is too extreme, do you have a theory with regards to how we do expand equality without going to such extremes?
I think we're doing a good job of that right now. I mean, how fast do you think how fast could you even hope for things to change? Look at what's happened to the situation with women since 1970. That's changed so fast that people can't even keep up. It's not obvious, by the way, either, that it's been particularly good for women. Now, you could make a case that it was good for society, maybe. It's a tough one, because the birth rate has plummeted. And so, maybe you don't care about that. Maybe you think there's too many people on the planet already, whatever. But, it isn't that easy to figure out when something is working properly. One of the things we seem to know, is that to the degree that rights are extended to women, economic prosperity follows. So you can see worldwide that the societies that have extended the rights to women most extensively are also the societies that seem to be flourishing economically. And there does seem to be a causal relationship. But women have paid a big price for that. So what's happened in part is, first of all, for say, women who are middle class or lower, their lives have essentially fallen apart because marriage is now restricted to the rich, which is also something to think about for those of you who think marriage is an oppressive patriarchal institution. It's like, okay, then why are only the rich people getting married? They're oppressing themselves? I don't think so. And so the women who are in the lower socioeconomic stratas are suffering madly, and so are their children. And they have terrible jobs most of the time, like jobs in retail where, they're called in every day for the next day. They don't have a schedule that's set out ahead of them. They get paid very badly. They've got kids to take care of. And so they have no free time. It makes them really easy targets for useless predatory males. And it's really hard on the kids. And that's like 40% of the female population, something like that. You guys, well, I don't know about all of you, but you're in university. You're part of the privileged cognitive elite, So these sorts of things don't really touch you the same way they touch other people. And so women are much unhappier if you look at national polls than they were, say, in the late 1950s and early 1960s. And I think that's partly because freedom and happiness, those are not the same thing. They're not even close. And I see young women all the time struggling to figure out what to do with their lives because they have no idea how to have a job/career and a family. So, and there's no answer to that. It's a really difficult problem. And there's all sorts of ideas. Like, I did a lot of consulting for law firms for a long time, about a decade. And I had a lot of clients who were extremely high-functioning female lawyers, younger ones, trying to figure out how to balance their career with their desire to have a life. And, you hear all the time about women being denied access to positions of power, and that's the consequence of prejudice and oppression. It's like, yeah, everything is caused by the same thing first. Right, you have got one causal principle. Wonderful. Now you're a philosopher. You can figure out everything with it. It's like the law firms cannot keep their women in their 30s. They cannot keep them, the big law firms. They all leave. Why? Because the women hit 30, they're brilliant, conscientious, intelligent. They were deadly in high school, deadly in university. They nailed law school. They whipped through their articling. They made partner by the time they were 30. It was like they're in a rocket to the top position. What do they find when they get there? 80-hour work weeks, right? Because that's one of the things you want to think about. You think that the people who run things are sitting at home smoking big cigars and telling their minions what to do. It's like that's like the 1920s millionaire that's on the cover of the Monopoly game. That's no sociological analysis. I know lots of people like that, and they work all the time, from the second they wake up till the second they go to sleep. And they don't just casually work. Because I know some of you go to the library for 6 hours and you say, well, I studied in the library for 6 hours. Like, no, you didn't. You studied for half an hour. You had coffee and you looked through Facebook and, you went home and you said, well, I studied for 6 hours and you're happy about it. But bloody well you didn't. Partly because you can't. I can only read for about 3.5 hours till I'm done. And I'm pretty good at it. So these people who are running things, there's corrupt people, obviously, but the vast majority of them, first, are self-made, and second, they're so bloody efficient and smart, you cannot believe it. And they work 80 hours a week. And most of them happen to be men. And why is that? Because there are a small number of insane men who will do nothing but work 80 hours a week. And no matter where you put them, if you put them in the middle of a forest with an axe, all they would do is run around chopping down trees. So the issue isn't, why aren't there more women in positions of power? It's, why are there any men insane enough ever to occupy those positions? Because we also know, and the data on this is very clear, what's the relationship between money and well-being? Once you have enough money to keep the bill collectors from your door, so once you have enough money to stave off misery, which is sort of lower middle class, something like that in our society, maybe a little lower than that, extra money does not help you. It does not improve your life. So why bother with it? Well, that's what the women in the law firms think. It's like most of them, by the time they're in their 30s, are married. Almost all of them are married to men who make as much money or more than they do, because that's what women go for, cross-culturally, 4 to 5 years older, equal or higher in the socioeconomic status. So their husbands already make $350,000 a year. It's like they think, well, I don't need much more money. The men use money to keep track of the competition, by the way, because all the male lawyers that I talk to are usually real hard-ass guys, really low in agreeableness, really high in conscientiousness, like conservative types, low in openness as well. And they want to win. And the reason they care about their damn bonus at the end of the year isn't even so much because of the money, it's because they got a much bigger bonus than the other son of a bitch sitting beside them, and they're happy about that. So there's a real brass knuckles competition that drives these sorts of things. But we get things backwards so often in psychology and in sociology. It's not why there aren't more women in positions of power. It's, why do any men want those positions? You just have no idea the amount of responsibility that comes along with that. You just imagine for a minute trying to run $1 billion corporation. You can't even bloody well balance your checkbook, and there's dust bunnies underneath your bed. How in the world would you ever run $1 billion corporation? Those things are complicated. And you have enemies, and they're trying to take you out all the time. You look at Apple and Samsung, man, they're just torturing each other in the courts nonstop. If you're running a big corporation, you'll be handling 200 or 300 lawsuits at a time. And that's just nothing compared to the complexity of what you actually have to do. Stay on top of the technology, constantly interact with your large customers, travel all the time because you have to maintain the relationships. You have to regulate the politics inside the business. Believe me, it's no picnic. And you think, well, they get a lot of money. It's like, what makes you think that's such a good thing? You know, like if you're half crazy and you have a lot of money, you're going to be crazy a lot faster, I can tell you that, because it frees you from all sorts of constraints. You know, we know the data on lottery winners. They're no happier a year later, and some of them are done, especially if they had like a bit of a cocaine problem to begin with, because, you know, being broke stops you from dying if you're a cocaine addict. You get enough money, and away you go. And you think to yourself, you know, you've got all sorts of bad habits and weirdnesses. If somebody dumped an infinite amount of money on you, what makes you think you wouldn't unravel completely? It's highly probable. So, anyway, so back to these women. You know, what they do when they're 30 is they look around and they've hit partners, so they've hit the pinnacle of their profession. They think, what the hell am I doing this for? Why would anyone in their right mind want to be woken up at 3 a.m. Sunday by their irate Japanese client who wants them to work for the next 5 hours non-stop to fix this damn problem, which is going to cost them $100 million right now? Or we'll find someone else to pay $750 an hour to fix it right now. And you think, well, that's, you know, a masculine form of value, because that's one of the criticisms. If the law firms just adopted a more feminine structure of value, it's like, what kind of bullshit is that? The reason that you get up at 3 a.m. on Sunday to talk to your Japanese client who's freaking out about their contract is because if you don't jump the hell up and do it right now, there's some starving associate who's unbelievably ambitious in New York who will pick up the pieces in 0.2 of a second, and they're smart and aggressive, and they'll take you out. So it has nothing to do with masculine structures of value. It's all the foolish ideas. And, you know, it's not just law where this happens. You know, we know, for example, that female doctors work far fewer hours too. So the more female doctors you have, the more doctors you have to have. And I'm not complaining about women's priorities. I'm not saying the women are wrong. Not at all. It's like the older I get, the more I understand that marriage and family are of primary importance. And the more I see women in particular, you know, they hit 35 or 40 and they're not married and they don't have kids and they are not happy. Because what the hell are you going to do from the time you're 40 till the time you're 80? You got no family? You got no relationships? What are you going to do? Go run your company. Yeah, well, if you're 1 in 1,000, that'll satisfy you. So you bloody well better make sure you're that 1 in 1,000, and you're probably not, because those people are rare. So
then, because Dr. Peterson, one of the natural responses to what you just said would be, okay, well, the priorities are, it's a rigged game because only women are the ones who are able to procreate. So what do we answer to that?
Of course it's a rigged game. Obviously it's a rigged game. Women have complicated lives, and the pill has made them more complicated. Well, that's not, I wouldn't say that exactly, because, you know, 100 years, in 1895, the average person in the Western world lived on $1 a day in today's money. Okay, so those people worked so hard and slaved away to such a degree that you can't even imagine it, and all their kids died, right? So the death rate among kids below 5 was beyond comprehension, and so, like, women had a terrible time of it, and, well, so did men. They got to be coal miners and soldiers, because that wasn't exactly entertaining, you know, so life was very, 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 very hard before we got rich. And we're rich. Even those of you who are in this class who think you're poor, it's like, oh, no, you're not. You're in the top 1/10 of 1% by historical standards, and probably there by current world standards as well. Of course, you can just compare yourself to the few people who are richer than you and feel sorry for yourself. But that's pretty pathetic in my estimation. So it's certainly historically uninformed. So yeah, women have it rough, obviously. Now, there's other things to consider. You do live 8 years longer. So that's not trivial. Testosterone kills men. That's basically why men die earlier. You know, and men are much more likely to be killed in dangerous jobs. They do almost all the dangerous jobs. They do almost all the outside work. And there's lots of reasons that men get paid more than women that have nothing to do with prejudice. It's because they take awful, horrible jobs, like working in the oil rigs in northern Alberta when it's bloody 40 below, and come out of that after 5 years with 2 or 3 fingers missing and all warped up. Because you really want to wrestle pipe when it's 40 below and it's filthy with a bunch of ordinary men who are hungover beyond belief? It's like, that's not very entertaining. So yeah, I mean, each gender, each sex has its own unfairness to deal with, but to think of that as a consequence of the social structure, it's like, come on, really? What about nature itself? And this is something that seems to be completely invisible on the left side of the political spectrum. It's like, of course you're bloody oppressed and your life is full of suffering, obviously. But to think about that as a direct consequence of unjust social structures is just moronic. It's like, that's part of the reason, a small part, but look where you're sitting, people. It's pretty warm in here. And you're so privileged you can come here on Saturday morning and listen to an intellectual lecture. It's like, you should be happy about that, because by historical standards, you should be out lifting rocks in your skeletal form, about 5'3" with no teeth. So
Fighting with cougars.
Yeah, cougars and lions, yeah, exactly. So, there's no gratitude, that's the thing. There's no gratitude for what our society is capable of doing. So,
Sorry?
Yeah, Dr. Peterson, tell me what you think about this, because I was thinking about this. What happens when the forces of the gender identity, gender expression, clash with the the capitalist market forces? For example, sports is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and if some women start saying, we express ourselves as men, we think we're men, and the law is on their side, do you think that this billion-dollar industry is going to put up with some women wanting to be, on football teams, on the Toronto Maple Leafs? I don't think so. So I'm wondering if some of the market forces will clash with this, and then some of these issues might resolve that way. What do you think?
well, market forces will be a constraining factor, partly because the market tends to punish things that don't work in the market very, very rapidly. And that's another thing with regards to thinking about, say, equality or equity in the workplace. If you believe that there is a equivalent distribution of talent across all possible categories, then you have some reason to wait for the market to sort itself out, because, even if you're an anti-capitalist, you at least have to understand that the people that you despise are motivated by greed. And so they're going to try to find people who will make them the most money, and they basically do that. It's a pretty stupid employer who won't take someone talented when they come along. We might say, well, they're prejudiced and they're not doing such a great job of sorting out the applicants. It's like, that's fine. They'll be stomped real good by people who are much better at it. Because talent is unbelievably rare. I don't know if you guys have talked about the Pareto distribution at all. But, productivity is not normally distributed. You learn in psychology that everything is normally distributed. It's like, no, it's not. Random things are normally distributed, but productivity isn't random. And so what you see, productivity is actually governed by something called Price's Law, which is a variation of another principle called the Pareto principle, which was discovered back in the late 1800s by Vilfredo Pareto, who was an economist. What Price showed, Price actually studied scientific productivity, and so what he showed, it's quite cool. At the time when he did this was in 1960, the typical PhD student had one publication on graduation. Okay, half as many had 2, half as many as that had 3, half as many as that had 4. Massive step down in productivity. And you see this in scientific productivity, period. So what happens is that in any given scientific domain, there's a clump of people sort of on the left side of the distribution, the less productive side, and and in that clump, men and women are equally productive. But then there's a tiny percentage of people who publish all the papers. And they're all men. And they're those insane men that I was telling you about before that do nothing but work for 80 hours a week. And the thing is, if you want to rise to the top of a profession, you think about it. What do you need to rise to the top of a competitive profession? You better be smart. Because smart makes you fast. And you're not going to get to the next place faster than anyone else unless you're faster than them. You bloody well better be conscientious, industrious in particular. So it should make you feel horrible every second of your life you spent doing something that involves leisure. And there's going to be some people in here that know that because they're hyper-conscientious. I can't stand sitting around doing nothing. I've got to find some work to do. And you'll do whatever you have to that's work because you feel guilty and horrible if you're sitting around. So you need to be hyper-conscientious. And so maybe you need to be in the top 1% for intelligence and maybe the top 5% for industriousness. So that's 1% of 5%. So you're looking at it. I think that's 1 in 1% of 5%? Yeah, it's 1 in 100 and 1 in 20. 1 in 2,000? I think that's right. Anyways, you're a rare bird if you're going to be in that position. And so because of the Pareto distribution and because of the concentration of productivity in a very small number of people, there's tremendous economic incentive to identify those people no matter where they're from, no matter who they are. And employers who have any sense know that. And they're hungry. Like these law firms, you have no idea the knots they tie themselves in trying to keep their qualified women, because those women are worth a bloody fortune. They pay them a lot, but they bring in way more business than they bring in far more economic resources than they take. The law firms want to keep them. Now, that doesn't mean all the men in the law firms don't have their problems with highly qualified women because they don't know what to do with them. Like if you're a guy and you're assertive and competitive, then you're going to be asserting yourself and competitive with other guys. But it's a lot harder to do that with a woman because you think, well, how am I going to be? Am I going to be like hyper aggressive around her? Because that just doesn't work out. And so the guys really don't know what to do about that. And I would say there's some residual trouble in law firms and other high-end industries because of that. They just don't know how to sort it out. But mostly the employers are thinking, I don't care if you're green, if you're smart and you can bring in business and you're reliable and you can solve problems, like we don't have anybody like you. We need you. Please stay. It doesn't happen. So yes, the market forces will, but the market forces I think are already going to push things hard in the direction of maximizing the utility of talent. Because you just have no idea how much more productive a productive person is than a non-productive person. It's crazy. It's crazy.
I just want to juxtapose that with a publication which just, not to get your blood boiling,
yeah.
but something somebody sent me. Glaciers, Gender and Science, a feminist glaciology framework for global environmental change research.
Yeah. Okay.
You want to talk about productivity, and then there's academia. And not to denigrate all of academia, but unfortunately, this is the profession in which people, have killed trillions of trees for bullshit, basically. So I just thought that would be a nice, ironic twist.
Yeah, well, the postmodernists, they don't believe in... I don't know how much you know about postmodernist philosophy. You're at Ryerson, so probably quite a bit. But not that the U of T is any better, because it's not. But the postmodernists don't believe in science. There's lots of things they don't believe in. They don't believe in logic. And I'm not making this stuff up. Like, you can go read it for yourself, Derrida in particular. They think that logic is part of the oppressive patriarchy and that there's no point in dialogue because all there is different power groups identified by their groups and they can't really talk. It's just a power struggle. And that's why the radical leftists stop people from speaking on campus. That's why I couldn't find anybody to debate me, roughly speaking, at the University of Toronto. Right. And I went to Queen's University 2 weeks ago to the law school there because I was invited by a group called the Runnymede Association, and they asked 6 professors if they would debate me. It's like, no. So why not? I'm not even a lawyer. And lawyers can debate. Like, they're good at that. That's what they're trained to do. No, they wouldn't debate me. So they had to get somebody to play devil's advocate, and he did a good job. He did a very credible job, I thought. But... And you think, well, why wouldn't they come out and debate me? That's easy. They don't believe in dialogue. Period. It's part of the philosophy. Because you have to believe in logic, first of all, to believe in dialogue. You have to believe that people can communicate as individuals, fundamentally, and not that you're just locked in your identity as group member against all the other identity groups that are struggling for power in the kind of Hobbesian landscape. That's all part of postmodernism. And this is just an extension of that. It's like science is just a oppressive patriarchal structure. And so we need to reconstitute it from the bottom up. It's like they type on their computers while they say this, not noticing that by the fact that they're using the damn computer, which wouldn't work. People had to figure out quantum mechanics before they could make computers. They use the computer. Science isn't real. Tap, 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 tap. It's like they do the same thing when they're in jet planes. Science isn't real. And here I am, 600 miles an hour, typing on my computer. It's like that's called a performative contradiction from a philosophical perspective, and that's the same as a logical paradox. You don't get to say one thing and do another and say that you've got it right. Well, you do if you're a postmodernist, because you can do whatever you want if you're a postmodernist. And the reason the damn postmodernists are Marxists, as far as I can tell, because inevitably they are, is because the problem with postmodernism is it doesn't even leave postmodernists anything to do. Because postmodernists don't believe in overarching directional narratives. And the problem with that proposition is if you don't have an overarching directive narrative for your life, you don't know what to do. And it's really important that you know what to do because you're alive and you need to do things.